On this Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, the Ringer has lost their minds, or are they overvaluing other players for other teams in their top 25 players, 25 and under in the NBA? We're going to talk about Chandler Parsons briefly. I apologize in advance for that. And we are going to get into the numbers potentially of this massive new NBA TV deal, what it might mean to Jaren Jackson Jr. and the Memphis Grizzlies. All that and more as the dynamic duo rides again on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is always a good day when Damichael Cole and I are sharing the hosting duties here on Locked On Grizzlies. Again, I would say between he and I, we do a pretty good job. I'm proud of the show we've built, and Damichael is back with me after a couple of days, tending to the actual day job, right? Like that's the important, like this is my hobby / side hustle. Damichael is the actual beat writer covering the Memphis Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal. You've been busy the last couple of days, partner.
Man, yeah, we're moving around a lot over here. You touched on a lot of it yesterday on yesterday's show, what we were covering at Fox Meadows Elementary School. Terrific event. You know, Taylor Jenkins donating over $20,000.
Amazing.
To Memphis Shelby County schools. I love the fact that the Grizzlies are really, tying themselves in and connecting with the education system. I'm sure, Coach Mullinax, he said they don't call you Mr. Mullinax in the school. No. So Coach Mullinax, I'm sure he likes to hear those educational stories as well.
Absolutely. It's good to see them reach out in that way. The cynic in me, and it's not necessarily cynical, it's also good business, right? You're trying to make that generational fandom. We've talked about that before. Those kids will buy tickets 10 years from now, those sorts of things.
Yep.
But again, I'm not taking away from what they did. It looked like an amazing
Gigi
event.
Jackson probably got a new fan, huh?
And any chance you get to trash talk an elementary student, you have to do it. So I shouted out Gigi for that. He definitely that was funny. That was good stuff.
Yeah.
Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts: YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Literally anywhere. Hopefully you're an everydayer at this point. We've had a really good run on YouTube. Our numbers are up for this time of year, which is fantastic. Again, it's not necessarily all about the numbers, but we like to keep the higher ups happy with the Locked On Grizzlies numbers. So thanks everybody for hanging around and checking us out. Hopefully every time an episode drops, you're with us here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, I want to start off with the Ringer, okay? Because the Ringer at times, and this is, a website connected to Bill Simmons and all that sort of stuff.
Publication,
This is not Grantland, right? Like, I feel like the Ringer is definitely a layer below that in terms of quality analysis. Zach Lowe ain't walking through that door, so to speak. I think that there's really good writers over there, and I think that there's some things that can be confusing. And I will admit that I perhaps was the somebody that fell for the trap of the bold prediction part of the Ringer. And we don't have to go too far down that road. But the thing that was most bold, even beyond their quote-unquote bold predictions, was the fact that Ja Morant, I believe they had tied for 10th in their top 25 players, 25 or younger. Desmond Bane made the list. I want to say he was like number 23 or something like that, 22. Jaren Jackson Jr., I want it 16-ish around there. And then Ja was 10. There's reasons for that, especially when it comes to Morant.
So let's be clear. No Grizzlies were in their top. I mean, Ja was tied with Zion Williamson for 10th.
Him and Zion were 10th. So there were no Grizzlies in the top 5, top 8. I think Jalen Williams of the Oklahoma City
Williams
Thunder
was ahead of Ja Morant. Yeah,
that was one of the ones that kind of raised my eyebrows. I didn't
Banchero,
fully Paolo Banchero. That made a little bit more sense, right?
He's good, but Ja Morant,
Ja Morant, again, if you read the measurements of the Ringer, it kind of alluded to, can you depend on this player? Mm-hmm. And again, this is the difference between Memphis market, which obviously Damichael knows better than anybody, and I've followed the Memphis market for a long time, even though I'm not there on the ground, and then the national window, which at times, Damichael obviously has all sorts of national connections, but as somebody that consumes NBA media on the more national scale, not just the Memphis one, if I was an outsider to Memphis and I saw what has happened with Ja Morant over the last 15 months, there's logic to the idea of, well, can you count on this guy? Now, Memphis might say, hell yeah, we can count on this guy. I think that there's reasons, if you're tapped into the Grizzlies day in and day out, to try to be optimistic about that. How do you think they overly were concerned about that? Do you think they were maybe not concerned enough? I mean, I know that's a leading question that maybe you can't fully answer, but where were you in terms of, again, Bane in, I think 22, 23, Jaren around 16, and then Ja tied for 10th with Zion. Was it more egregious to you that Ja was that low, or was it more egregious to you the names that were in front of Ja at this point?
Yeah,
maybe a little bit of both.
I will give them credit from the standpoint of there was consistency to what their method of thinking was. Like you said, the availability thing was something that they talked about, and Zion Williamson, who you can make the same argument for as being better than some of those other players, was tied with 10th with Ja Morant. It's probably no coincidence. Guys who are tied for 10th are probably top 5 talents, but have had injury concerns. In Ja's case, some suspension stuff as well, off the court stuff, kind of like limit their availability, so to speak. But I mean, still, it's still tough for me to say, Jalen Williams over Ja Morant.
That was the worst one to me. That was foolish.
I know that Jalen Williams is some durable. I mean, if we're basing it off of availability, is 2 years a big enough sample size? Because if that's the case, Ja Morant, first 2 years, he wasn't. I mean, he didn't play 70 games or anything, but he was available. I don't think people had long-term injury concerns or long-term availability concerns with Ja Morant at that point, other than the natural, athletic point guard stuff that tends to happen. But I just feel like we're getting to a point that Ja Morant is starting to kind of be in the shadows. He has this saying, right in the dark, and it's actually what it is now. Like, Ja Morant couldn't work in the dark last year. He was one of the biggest stars in the game. He's still a star, but you're starting to see, like, they're trying to – the Tyrese Halliburton, who was top 5, by the way, Anthony Edwards, who was top 2 on that same list. I
think Wemby was number 1, Wembanyama, which, that makes sense.
Yeah, I ain't going to argue with that. But it's the fact that I think Luka was on there and some other Luka, Anthony Edwards, Wemby makes sense to me. But even Anthony Edwards, I think when we're talking about availability with a guy like Ja Morant, I don't think we've seen enough big-time injuries. Zion Williamson has missed large parts of seasons. Ja Morant's longest missed period was this season twice. Both of his longest absences came this season. 25-game suspension and, the labral tear. He had that one stretch, actually right before I got on the beat, where he got hurt in November and came back a month later in December. And I think up to that point of his career, that was the longest he had been out, and that was a little bit more than a month. So I don't have any big injury concerns with Ja Morant. He's going to get nicks and bruises and stuff here and there. He's going to miss some games because of his style of play. But I think that's one of those lazy narratives that's probably starting to form, in my opinion. And I can't fathom the idea of putting Ja Morant outside the top 5 when 2 years ago, these same people were saying that, Ja's the next big thing.
Yeah, we're very much prisoners of the moment, right?
And for sure.
This isn't locked on. This isn't locked on.
Tyrese Halliburton in the top 5. I thought you had something to say about that.
Well, if it was top 5 terrible turnovers with the game on the line, Tyrese Halliburton would definitely be in the mix. I think that here's where I stand. And Kenny Smith, before we, got set up to record this, he went on like a minute-long tangent on Inside the NBA, which might be going away. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. He went on like a minute-long tangent about how whoever wins the Western Conference Finals between Luka and Edwards, they are the new face of the NBA. And they're going up against Boston, and it's going to be, it's not that Dallas lost, it's that Luka lost. Or it's not that Minnesota lost, because I think most people, even after the Celtics struggling with Indiana in game 1, I think most people see it as Boston's championship to lose at this point. It's going to be that player lost, not their team. And Charles Barkley, I didn't see the whole thing because I saw it on social media, but he said, that's the dumbest thing I think you've ever said, or something like that, to paraphrase Chuck, which is why Inside the NBA is such a great show, that chemistry they have. But I think that we get so caught up in what's currently happening. And again, this is a societal thing, not just an NBA thing. You forget what literally just happened, right? And Ja Morant, a year or two ago, was the face of the NBA, young NBA. They were having Memphis Grizzlies Day on ESPN. Like there hasn't been a Minnesota Timberwolves Day, unless I missed it. There hasn't been a Dallas Mavericks Day. Like there's something to be said for what Morant was. And if you want to say he's missed his window, that might wind up being true. It feels silly to say that at this time,
right? Given
the current state of play and how young he indeed still is. And, it's more of an opportunity for him to kind of reestablish himself than it is, I'm out of there, right? It's not like he's 30. It's not like, we literally are not going to see a 30-year-old Ja Morant until the year, 2030-ish.
Yeah, so it's not a situation where he's been dealing with a bunch of knee injuries and major injuries or anything like that.
Right. It's not like a big man with a foot injury. There's not reasons to be concerned health-wise. And if you hope and believe that he's learned from these things like he said he has, and again, whether he should have to learn it all or not, I'm not getting down that path. But whatever the case might be, if he's on the court, I'm with you. He's one of the top 5 under 25 in the entire NBA. Jaren and Bane are probably roughly where they should be. But Ja being 10, that was pretty crazy to me. Let us know in the comments what you guys feel about that, whether or not, Bane at 23, Jaren around 16, Ja tied for 10th. It sounds like Damichael and I are on the same page there. That was pretty crazy. Where would you have put those guys if you were making that ranking? When we come back, Chandler Parsons went on a show of a comedian, I want to say, Daniel Tosh, who I haven't thought about in a very long time. But apparently Daniel Tosh has a podcast, and Chandler Parsons had opinions about Memphis. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Make yours next. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are talking Chandler Parsons, unfortunately. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He is the award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am thrilled to have him back with me after a couple of solo shows. And Damichael, we talked about the current state of the Memphis Grizzlies, their current core. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about somebody that was supposed to be a core piece, and it completely fell apart several years ago, and that would be Chandler Parsons.
He fell apart.
Literally, yeah, that's fair. Now, this goes back to the David Fizdale time, when David Fizdale was the head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies. And I have to be honest with you, Damichael, I don't know if you read Grizzly Bear Blues back then. You probably didn't, and that's okay. But I have to take partial responsibility for Chandler Parsons, because one of my first biggest early articles when I took over, kind of a leadership role at GBB was Never a Bride, and why Chandler Parsons made sense. And this was like a free agency primer with the Memphis Grizzlies. It caught traction. I think that was one of the pieces that like Zach Lowe retweeted and that sort of thing. I used to be a big deal. But the reality of the situation is it was one of my bigger early pieces. And
you lit a fire, Joe.
I lit a fire. I don't know if the Grizzlies read it. I mean, I know the Grizzlies used to read my stuff. I don't know if Chandler Parsons read it. Maybe they thought it made sense. But Chandler Parsons, through Mike Conley, and again, maybe that's a topic for another later in the off-season episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Chandler Parsons becomes a member of the franchise, and it didn't go well, right? Parsons basically bleeds Memphis out for their money, barely plays. When he does play, he's not fully healthy, all sorts of things. He goes on the Daniel Tosh podcast, and he talks about how much he hated his time in Memphis, how much it smells like barbecue across the whole city, which, for the record, even if that was true, which it's obviously not, even if that was true, that's not bad at all. Like, I want my
I wish my neighborhood smelled like I could just, see the smoke outside and the barbecue.
Are you trying to tell me that my entire home and neighborhood would smell like the barbecue shop or like Central Barbecue? Like, we're not sponsored by them. Maybe we should be. Yeah. Are you trying to tell me that Cozy Corner is right down the street, or at least that's the way it smells? Sign me up. But regardless, Parsons, it kind of opened up old wounds for folks, myself included, about how Parsons' time went in Memphis, because Damichael, he was supposed to be the bridge. Right? He was supposed to be the bridge from one era of Grizzlies basketball, grit and grind, to the next. And that obviously didn't happen for a variety of reasons. I'm guessing you don't pay much mind to Chandler Parsons most days, but what did you think of those comments? Did you think anything of them? It felt like a guy who has sour grapes about a time and place in his life that made him richer than he had ever been. And it just seemed really, I don't want to say classless, but it seemed very, unaware of, time moving along, and maybe you should too.
Yeah, I feel like as we all go through this thing called life, right? We have what's called peaks.
Ooh.
Peaks in our life, Joe.
I like
you have your peaks. For a lot of NBA guys, it's during their career. For some people, their peak is in high school. Some may be middle school. Some their peaks maybe their 60s and 70s when they finally get everything that they want and become the person that they want. Whatever the case may be. Chandler Parsons' peak was right before he got to Memphis as a player, but his peak when he got to Memphis was when he got the the big contract and whatnot. And to be pretty honest here, no one really cares about what Chandler Parsons did in his NBA career. No, he's not a guy who is going to come up in too many barbershop conversations or anything like that. There was nothing special to his game. He knocked down some three-pointers, 6'10", 6'9" guy. Nice, but you ain't going to find too many videos of him crossing guys, over dunking on people, making big-time playoff shots. Like, Chandler Parsons just is not a very memorable NBA player from that perspective. But the one thing that he can do, and he can say to make himself in the conversation to the points where people like us on Locked On Grizzlies are dedicating a segment to what he's saying, is when he talks about this situation with the Grizzlies. Because how is Chandler Parsons remembered more than anything? You may say, I remember him from Florida a little bit. I remember him with the Rockets a little bit. Most people are going to say they remember him for signing one of the worst contracts of the 21st century at this point. I believe it was during the big balloon year that we're going to talk about here coming up. Yeah, that offseason when the salary cap spiked and he was one of the players to take advantage. I believe Bismack Biyombo got a big deal.
That's how Kevin Durant wound up in Golden State.
Kevin Durant, ended up in Golden State. But Chandler Parsons, that was a peak moment for him as a person and a basketball player from the standpoint of that's the only thing that he can talk about. Now, this wasn't the first time he's talked about it. He's talked about it other times. Yes. So when I heard it, I brushed it off. And anyways, like he's not a credible source for Memphis. Like, so I've lived in Memphis pretty much my whole life. I went away a couple years to work at Philadelphia Inquirer, went to school or whatever. But I've never heard anyone say that the entire city smelled like barbecue. We have some people say things about the nightlife and things here, but still, he's still not a credible source for that. For what I used to hear, he had him a place to go out to, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, we're not going to go down that road. I've heard the same things, partner.
He had him a place that he
had a spot or two.
Yeah. But,
how close it was to the local high school might be. No, that's pure speculation. I can't stand by that. That's a bad joke.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just I think he'll talk about it some more, and then that's how he generates his buzz. If he talks about his NBA career, who cares? If he talks about when he made a big 3-pointer with the Rockets, it's not going to go viral. But when he talks about the city of Memphis, And, I don't think he said it in this interview, but there were past interviews where he said things like, oh, I knew I was hurt before I signed with Memphis.
Oh, yeah, that was
They were
bad.
still going to give me the money, right? So he took the money there because other places he was going to have to get a physical, and he knew he wasn't going to pass the physical. So basically, speaking to how he finessed the Grizzlies into getting the deal. So that's how he keeps himself relevant. He knows that his contract is one of the worst, and he kind of, leverages it into his way of relevancy. So that was a peak for him.
I agree with you. I think you're 100% right. I, again, partially apologize. I feel partially responsible for bringing him to Memphis. I do think that, again, as somebody that covered the team during that time, it was an exciting time because Conley re-signed, right? That was the biggest contract in Grizzlies history at the time. I think for a short period there, Conley had signed the biggest contract
in NBA
history. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of money was flowing, and the Parsons deal did not work out. But all that money sounds like, partner, it's going to be flowing again here shortly. A new NBA TV deal is rumored to be finalized, announced here soon. There's pros and cons to that, and there's something in particular that could impact the Grizzlies. We'll talk about all that as much as we can in a 10-minute segment next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, notice that Damichael and I have a wonderful working relationship. We're talking basketball. He's humoring me talking about Chandler Parsons. It's been a good chat, and we're not yelling at each other. This isn't Fox Sports. This isn't ESPN, where it's talking heads just being mad, blah, blah, blah. We're trying to give you real analysis here on Locked On Grizzlies, and you can expect more of that over at Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also check it out as part of the Amazon Fire TV channel's app. All the great analysis of all the great Locked On podcasts like Locked On Grizzlies, plus our league shows like Locked On NBA and so much more. Playoffs are going on in the NHL and the NBA. If you want to get caught up, there's no better place to do it than Locked On Sports Today. So make sure you're checking that out ASAP. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all have things that we really want to get off our chest at times. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small, but we all carry around different stressors. And if we keep them bottled up, it can affect us negatively. It can affect not just our mental health, but our physical health. Therapy is a safe space to get things off of your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down. Maybe it'll help you set boundaries in the workplace. Maybe you'll learn positive coping skills if you're going through a stressful or difficult time. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's not just for people that have experienced some major life event or trauma. It can be for someone who just needs help getting through the day. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll close out today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies talking about the rumored, soon-to-be official, new TV deal for the NBA and what that might mean to the Memphis Grizzlies. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're following him on X if you haven't already done so, at Damichael C. Lots of great work over at the Commercial Appeal. Make sure you're checking me out on X if you want to, over at Joe Mullinax. It can be a wild ride sometimes on X, and I'll leave it at that. Damichael, will close on this. The new television deal, I want to say, again, rumored. It hasn't been officially announced.
SBJ is one of the places that's reported that, some things are
and they're pretty reputable. Right.
Oh, for sure.
It's
Business
important.
Journal,
Sports Business Journal. Again, we say rumored just because the league hasn't announced it. This is almost certainly going to happen, barring some last minute falling apart.
Yeah.
The NBA, a new deal involving ESPN. I think they've talked about Amazon streaming some shows or games. And then the big one being NBC, right? This could be the end of TNT and Warner Brothers Discovery carrying the NBA, which would mean the end of Inside the NBA. Maybe we mourned that on a later episode. But the biggest thing that could impact the Memphis Grizzlies is the money, right? I think the rumored number across all of these next deals is something like $7 billion. And that, first off, is a phenomenal amount of money, right? Like, I think
it's a phenomenal job by Adam Silver.
I don't know. I'm not going to give the worst GM in professional sports.
No. I'm being sarcastic here. I'm not being literal. It's a phenomenal job by Adam Silver, and I'm sure you were going to mention this. So I probably said it before you. But the 10% cap increase is as high as the increase can go. $7 billion. Surely you can increase the cap by more than 10%. That's some
Apparently not.
brilliancy right there.
So that's important, right? And I know that you and I were talking about before we started recording.
Yeah.
Keith Smith, who's phenomenal with this. He's a contributor,
friend of the show. He'll be on the show this summer. Yeah,
wonderful. I love to hear that. Yeah, he's a good dude. He was talking about the realities of this, right, and what this could mean financially for the Grizzlies and for the NBA at large, not just the Grizzlies. But this is something where you could realistically see the cap go up to something like $200 million in the 2028-2029 season. That's just the cap. That doesn't include luxury tax, aprons, all that sort of thing. A 35, and this is from Keith at Keith Smith NBA, a 35% max in 2028-2029, which, by the way, is around when Ja will be eligible for his next extension. That year projects to be $72 million. The fifth-year salary would be $95 million. Total value of the max deal, which, again, Ja Morant, assuming he stays Ja Morant.
This is
5 years, $419 million. It makes you wish
Joe,
that you were born both tall and athletic.
I remember when Steph Curry got a extension once upon a time, and it was like 4 years, $44 million. You're talking about nearly double that in 1 year on a current max salary. Just what? Maybe when Curry got that deal, maybe 15 years later.
Yeah,
that is wild.
It's impressive, and it changes the reality for Memphis potentially, in part because of that 10% cap increase. That is a hard number, can't go beyond that. It's designed to prevent the Chandler Parsons and Kevin Durant to Golden States of the world from happening. It also has the unintended effect of, if you are a player like Jaren Jackson Jr., who potentially could be up for a contract extension, and you have to try to figure out what is best for you financially, if you want to wait until those numbers kick in. And usually they have contract language, and you'll know more about this than me, partner. But usually they have language they can write into a contract, like an escalator sort of thing, adapt it to whatever the percentage of the cap is that year, that sort of stuff. And that might kind of negate it. But if you're Jaren and your contract's up in the next couple of years, that makes this even more impressive, because it's safe to say he's going to make more money, or he was going to make more money even without this new TV deal. But for the cap to jump that much, it's going to be in Jaren's best interest to really keep an eye on this. And of course, Ja and Dez later on down the road.
Yeah. And we talk about Jaren because, for those unfamiliar, Jaren has 2 years left on his deal. This next upcoming season, the 2024-2025 season, and then he will be extension eligible basically next offseason, to make this easy. During the 2025 offseason, he will be extension eligible. Then he'll have 1 more year left on his current deal, which is de-escalating. So it'll be 15% of the cap in his final season on that deal. Now, here's where the things get tricky in terms of with Jaren Jackson Jr. Overall, I think it's not a huge deal, because the Grizzlies are going to be over the cap. 10% cap increase is not going to change the fact that this team's going to be over the cap because of the Ja deal, because of the Desmond Bane deal. We'll see. I mean, maybe if the Marcus Smart situation, things that happen there. But the main thing is Jaren Jackson Jr.'s deal. We talked about it possibly being $300 million. That 2026 year is the first year where the new TV deal would be in place. He could be looking at upwards of $325 million. Yeah, I mean, he could clear $300 million relatively easy. And the reason that is the case, because for you unfamiliar with how max contracts in the NBA work, they're based on percentages, right? There's a 25% and a 30% max for rookie extensions. For example, Ja Morant and Desmond Bane both got the 25% max extension. If you remember, me and Joe had the whole conversation about if Ja would have made All-NBA, he would have leaped to the 30% max extension, which Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton, by the way, NBA on yesterday, they are now eligible for the 30% of rookie scale max extension instead of the 25% one. Now, when you're an established veteran in the NBA, you are eligible automatically for the 30% max extension, but you can get the super max, which is the 35%, which is the one that Jaylen Brown has signed and has made him, the highest paid player in the NBA with over a $300 million contract. Jason Tatum is probably about to be right behind him and join them. He's going to get a contract because he was first team All NBA this season. He's going to get a deal worth north of $300 million as well. Jaren Jackson Jr., we'll have the whole talk about the All NBA stuff and whatnot. He's automatically going to be at 30%, which puts him above Ja and Dez already because the salary cap is different for one, and he's at 30% while they're at 25%. But if he makes All NBA, whoo, Joe Mullinax, he'll be one of the richest players to ever play the game.
Pretty amazing how that money is shaking out. And that's going to be a wonderful thing for us to dive further into. I know you've talked about having Keith on the show over the summer. I think that's a great idea. We'll dive more into those numbers, what this actually will look like once it becomes official. And again, it's all but official. SBJ is a very reputable source, but it just hasn't been officially announced by the league yet. So how that all kind of shakes out is going to be fascinating. And it's going to impact not just Jaren's money, but a lot of these players' money, especially since it's tied to the All-NBA stuff. Jaren is going to have lots of reasons to be very motivated to compete at the highest level next season. Let us know what you think of the new TV numbers. Again, $7 billion is the rumored number between ESPN and Amazon and NBC. NBC potentially taking over that NBA content. And remember, that doesn't necessarily just mean it's NBC and that's it. It could be USA Network. There's a whole family of channels that go along under Comcast Universal, I believe, is the official company. And there's lots of different ways that could play out. So it's going to be fascinating to get all those details. Let us know what you think in the comments. The next time we are on Locked On Grizzlies, it'll be the Friday edition of the show. I'm going to take a little 4-day weekend because there won't be a Memorial Day episode. Damichael will get the Friday show solo. And I know you want to talk about some of that all NBA stuff a little bit more in depth, partner. And again, where Jaren kind of aligns in all of that process.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that a little bit potentially. And then these mock drafts as well. Mock drafts are being updated. And I think it's time for us to kind of take another look at where the Grizzlies, certain guys are projected to go. Scouts and things are saying different things. I've been talking to people a little bit, and we'll give an update, just on what we're hearing and where things stand.
It's looking more and more like if the Grizzlies want my boy Klingon, they're going to have to move up to 6. And I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense or not. So I'll be sure to listen to Locked On Grizzlies, as I always do when I'm not on, because Damichael is phenomenal. And, Damichael will close out our week on Friday. Again, as I alluded to, we're going to take off Memorial Day because hopefully you're enjoying time with your family at a cookout and you're not listening to podcasts. But we'll be back with you on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies next week. Thank you guys so much for being with us today and tomorrow and yesterday and hopefully every day as someone who every time an episode drops of Locked On Grizzlies, you are checking it out. Damichael appreciates it, as do I. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, all of those fun things over on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're checking out Damichael on tomorrow's show. Make sure that you are with us each and every time an episode drops here on Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports today. Next, the first ever streaming 24/7 channel on YouTube. It's also on Amazon Fire under the free TV channels app. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. We will catch you on Friday, and then it'll be Memorial Day. Summertime is here. Locked On Grizzlies is sticking with you. Have a great rest of your day.